Thank you very much for inviting me along to participate in this discussion. And on a Thursday evening to talk about Brexit, you're all very brave. And I'll try not to mention COVID, but I think that will be impossible. As we all know, business is now in a situation where we've got a perfect storm, absolute perfect storm. We couldn't write the book where we've got Brexit and COVID in the same year, and massive challenges ahead for all of us, irrespective of which sector you're in or size of company you are. And I think that's a point we can maybe have some discussion about. What does Brexit mean? It means we're no longer part of this wonderful big family known as the EU. So therefore we no longer operate as a bloc where we can operate as a single trading unit with no tariffs, no border checks, little requirement for import-export docs, and with a combined VAT system. But we voted for it. Some of us maybe didn't, but at the end of the day, it's here and we've now got to deal with it in the best way we can. We've now got, as you know, a separate free trade agreement. We've now got our own customs borders. We're operating in different locations. And we've also got absolutely looking at custom tariffs and also new rules of origin. So we've got to meet all of these requirements. And obviously a requirement now for customs declarations and a VAT accounting system, which some of you may in fact have already been experiencing. So the challenges that we face, we've always saw the media where initially, you know, we've looked at massive queues at ports, especially in the first few weeks in January. Now, in actual fact, those queues would have been even treble what they were, because a lot of businesses actually stockpiled a lot of their operations and exported in the last November, December into Europe and through Europe for other hubs. Had they not done that, the situation would even have been worsened for many of us, actually. So we had stockpiling going on, and we also had, and we've now got a number of businesses who are repositioning their warehouses. That's happening as we speak. And I rather suspect, unfortunately, that will actually increase because there's no doubt about it. The costs of doing business now with Brexit are actually increasing. And those businesses who were, I won't say better prepared, but those businesses who had the time to strategically look at their operations and they've relocated, either relocated their warehouses in different parts of Europe. And as I said, unfortunately, I can see that increasing as we move forward into 2021, and probably combining that with the COVID challenges, which has been an added situation that we're all having to cope with. Now, were we all prepared? Did we know what we were preparing for? And the answer was no and no. We all went towards the let's prepare for Brexit workshops, and I was one of them, or rushing into the portals of how to prepare for Brexit and the Brexit checklist, and we all ticked that off quite neatly. The problem we all faced, and hindsight is just a wonderful, was we didn't know what we were preparing for. And the timeline was so damn tight for the majority of us. We are learning on the job as we speak. Now, you know, we look at it and we think, well, you know, we thought that we had enough trained customs people to help us out. We don't. Massive skill shortage in that area. We also didn't quite understand that the products and services that we deliver, you know, we didn't quite understand in some cases how they were being composed. Whether we are the, you know, the carpet fitter that was bringing in a small tool coming from France or Germany, and then basically importing it, adding it to the value of what we do, and then having to export it back out again. If it wasn't adding value, that was an additional cost. So we didn't actually understand our supply chains. And, you know, and I think that's learning for us. And, you know, there's still a lot of pain to be had in that situation. We also didn't quite understand the importance of vets to clear our agricultural and our animal food stock. And again, we were caught in that respect. Bureaucratic processes, we were led to believe that these are going to be reduced. I'm forever an optimist, so let's hope that as we progress and further discussions with our partners in the EU, that we will look at streamlining these processes as quickly as we possibly can. I think the Financial Times estimated that something like 250 million new customs declarations were going to be necessary per year. That's one hell of a lot of bureaucracy, and an increase in the cost of us doing business. We've also got to look at the freight movements, you know, the trucks going and the full costs of that. We were also hit with, and it's quite interesting because, you know, the VAT and the customs, I'm just checking a figure here, that mail order, you know, we're all on to click and collect now. We're all ordering online. We're all happy because that's a new route for many of us. And we also want to grow, obviously, our e-commerce trading. But I'll give you a personal example of husband and a pair of slippers. These slippers have gone all around the UK because they dared to be the wrong size. And the postman wouldn't take them back because we didn't have a customs declaration for them. And that's just one item. I mean, the cost of those slippers and the cost it's taken to get them to returned, because it turns out that the supplier was out with the UK, has been extraordinary. And none of us were ready for this. I mean, we really weren't. We've got our Scottish seafood exporters, you know, being unable to sell what they catch and the implications of that. We've also got something like DLE. It's actually refusing to send anything back to in and out of Europe. So combining all of that, because of time here, combining all of that, were we prepared? No, we absolutely weren't. Could we have done better? Probably yes, but we're in a learning situation. That's why I think that we're going to need to rely on as much support as we possibly can, because whilst we're having to remodel our businesses to cater for the COVID challenges, we're also going to have to remodel and are remodeling our businesses to cope with the EU. Those businesses who are already used to exporting and importing out with Europe, they were better set up and better established because they had similar type processes and had similar documentation to complete. So they're a bit ahead of the game. And we are seeing an increase in our ports in terms of supporting the services at ports for businesses. That's going to take time to kick in. And we're also seeing a bit more. The announcement this morning, I think it was, of a new fund from the UK government of 20 million. Wonderful big one-liner, but it's not a hell of a lot of money when you've got millions of businesses trying to cope with this situation. So we're having to recost our whole business model. And we need, as I say, each other and business to businesses to help one another to be able to do that. Through chambers, we've got training, we've got advice, we've got support, but there are many other organisations that are in that arena. So, you know, let's hope that we can all come together. But the point being that costs are there. It's going to cost us more from a consumer perspective, and at a time when, as I said, the perfect storm has hit us. But I'm pretty optimistic that I know that we will get through this because we do that as business leaders and business owners. So I'm confident we will do it, but it's going to be damn hard. Thank you.
And let's just, you know, you kind of touched on it there, but what's the kind of main part then that the Scottish Chambers can play in terms of making this kind of more understandable for people, or letting people know what they should be doing?
The Chambers have been working over the last probably about 12 to 14 months on training, and in particular we accelerated that in the last 6 months of 2020. So they've got a lot of training available to help businesses to understand what documentation is necessary and what they have to do in that process. So that's, I think, point one. Point two is look at one-to-one advice on just a helpline. You know, if you just phone, you say, you know, I don't understand what this form is, help me. Or I didn't realise I have to do X, Y, and Z to take my product to Spain. But it's not about exporting, it's also that importing bit. And I think that's quite important to reinforce that issue, because we didn't understand how our products are actually made up. We've got the vehicles, we've got a list of all the products and services. And I haven't touched the financial services, and that's for later on. So training, advice, and also that one-to-one support. So they're there for that purpose, so use them. It's free except for training. But I'm sure that Scottish Development International and others, American agencies, will help support the contributions towards our enhanced training for many businesses.
Yeah, and I think it's probably important, you know, now more than ever, where you can't physically go and see someone, that you reach out to things like Chambers of Commerce and other kind of groups, you know, that will have that kind of advice and be a person to speak to as well. And
I think it's also important that a lot of the corporate businesses in Scotland, a number of them have already offered two chambers, I'm sure others, and I'm sure through the Women's Business Association as well, have also offered to help in whatever way they can. So that collective point that I'm making about coming together, nobody should be having a situation where they really don't know what to do. There's enough help and support out there. We just need to reach out for it.
Yeah, okay. Liz, thanks very much. We've got some questions here that I'll come back to at the end, and we'll just move on to our next speaker, but thanks very much for that. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're over to Jo Graham, who's been a SWIB member for quite a long time, longer than I've been here, and I've been here for about 4 or 5 years now. And Jo is involved in a number of things, but I know her best as the Whisky Ambassador. So over to Jo.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, I'm Jo Graham. I do know a few of you who are online just now, so hi there. Hope you're all keeping well. As Debbie says, I've got a number of different hats. I run a company called the Whisky Ambassador, where we deliver training in whisky, and I see Caroline's here tonight. Caroline writes our blog for us, so look on and you'll get to hear her snippets of wisdom about whisky. Anyway, what the business is we train bar staff primarily, and those who are interested in whisky in how to sell and serve Scotch whisky, and we now train in over 30 countries, and we've trained over 4,000 people worldwide. So it from what we thought was just going to be a little training organisation within Scotland, it has developed. We don't actually employ anyone, so we haven't got the employment issues with regards to changing with Brexit on that front, and I'm sure Catherine will be covering quite a lot of that as well. We also don't ship any product at the moment. Have just bought a cask of whisky. Well, it's not whisky yet, it's just new make, so in a few years' time we can maybe meet up over a dram, but we'll talk about that again. What we do is we only send certificates to our partners and they distribute them, so we don't have product in any way going internationally. So we haven't had to change too much of what we do within the EU. We have had to do things like checking our data protection. When we were part of the EU and we were covered under GDPR, we knew we were okay on that, but as soon as you come out of it, you've got to start making further checks. I did go through the checklist that Liz mentioned about what your business needs to do. I think I did it on Boxing Day after the announcement on Christmas Eve of the trade deal. Which was very helpful, but as a very small business, I think it's what Liz was saying, is that we need somebody to be able to just say, what do I do with, instead of being pointed at another website that tells you to read through for another 2 days to find the same information said in a different way. So hopefully we'll not be having to join and leave the EU again, but any other things like this, I think for government, it's about getting the support there in easily tangible pieces of information of telling you just what you need to do. I'm really glad I'm not exporting at the moment, having seen all of the queues, all of the product that's actually gone off. They can't sell it because it's taken too long to get there. The mountains of paperwork. I'm not sure if anyone heard that even John Lewis isn't delivering in Northern Ireland now because of the concerns that they have with getting things across, and the paperwork involved with that. So it is daunting, and the smallest of businesses are probably struggling. Even some of the large ones are struggling on that. So, however, the deal that was generated for, especially for the whisky industry, was actually fairly good. You may have heard that the tariffs that the ex-president of the United States put on the whisky industry. I don't know if you've heard, but what they did was they put a 25% tariff on malt whisky because they weren't happy with the deal that was done with Airbus. So the whisky industry had to basically took the hit, because I'm sure you all know about tariffs. It's actually just a levy that's introduced. It's the importer that has to pay the levy to their government. So it was just a tax. But obviously, as an importer, if you're going to pay a 25% tax, you're going to have to pass that on to your customer. So basically, the sales went down to the extent of £500 million, 500 million last year, in a year, which is quite significant. They only put the tariff onto malt whisky. They didn't put it onto blended whisky. It would have been hugely more than 500 million had they put it across the board onto all whisky. We export 90% of the whisky that we make, but only 15% of that is actually malt whisky. The rest of it's blended whisky, like Johnny Walker. Anyway, I'll stop talking about whisky. So, as a business myself, we were quite aware of what we're going to have to do, because we don't sell product abroad. But the other area of the business that I'm involved in quite heavily, both in helping businesses and as a trustee of one of the charities that help them, is the licence trade. And I think, Liz, your phrase of the perfect storm absolutely hit the licence trade, talking about alcohol licence trade on sales primarily. Pre-COVID, we were very much interested in recruitment and how to maintain and recruit people within the UK to fill these vacancies that were going to be generated. We wouldn't, as an industry and the roles that we have, it wouldn't allow for us to have, we wouldn't reach the points anywhere near reach the points to be able to say that this was a required position within, that we couldn't recruit from inside of the UK. So what we were looking at doing, and what we did, was looked at trying to make sure that the roles that we had were attractive roles, that people were actually going to be able to want to apply for them, that they could make a career out of them, rather than it just being seen as a bar job. And I actually heard at one point, which kind of frustrated me, somebody who said, well, if I don't get anything else, I'll go and work in a bar. Which I think at the age of, and I shouldn't say this, 17, when I shouldn't have been working in a bar, it was a long time ago, but I did work in a bar when I was 17, and it was because I was a student and it just fitted. So we would still get students working for us, but there would be a huge vacancy and a gap in being able to recruit, especially in northern Scotland. Central Belt, quite often we can recruit, but in areas further north, if you've ever been up recently on holiday or touring, obviously before we had to stay at home, there was very much, obviously, unless you are sort of high up in the government and you're allowed to go travelling, well, you might get caught, but never mind. But anyway, sorry, I will get back onto point. A lot of people who work in the industry, in the tourist areas especially, came from the EU, and it was going to create a huge skills gap. So we were looking at trying to help businesses in generate those, making it a career that people wanted to stay within, that through training, through development, through looking at shift patterns, looking at what people did, making sure that we were flexible and make it an attractive area to work in. So that was pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID came along, and I have to say the licence trade has struggled, is struggling, and will continue to struggle. There are a number of people I've helped, unfortunately, and they've just had to make all their staff redundant. People say, well, what about furlough? Furlough, yes, furlough is something you can do, but there are still costs associated with it. It's not free money to the employer just to pass on. It is part payment of the wages, with pension costs, etc. I had one client who was dealing with a wage bill after not having anybody doing a stroke of work, still had to pay £30,000 in the month, and with no sales coming in, that's just not sustainable. So unfortunately, there have been a large number of redundancies. associated with that. So I'm not going to end on a negative note, because the licensed trade is very, it's a people industry, and the people that work in it are always very positive. So even though we have had to make a lot of people redundant, they have done lots to try and make things ready for when we can start to get people back in. And my plea to everybody, once it's allowed and it's safe to do so, please go out. And that's me.
Jo, there will be absolutely no stopping me going to a pub or a restaurant as soon as we're allowed to do so. So I think I'll make a lot of that money back for people within the first couple of weeks, because I'm chomping at the bit to get back out for a nice dinner and a nice cocktail and stuff like that. But I think I think the licensed trade is probably one of the hardest hit areas of COVID and everything. And you look at the impact of Brexit, as you've just described, along with COVID, I know it's not all kind of doom and gloom, but you do wonder, how many of these kind of, especially smaller bars and stuff like that, are going to be able to come out the other side of it.
Yeah, there's just one example, the big pubcos, so the likes of Green King and Punch Taverns, bars, all of these types of, they own major chains. They have actually been very good to their tenants, and they've reduced the rent. You've got private landlords who are refusing to reduce the rent. So these sorts of things, it's quite difficult and quite challenging, because these bills still have to be paid if you want to stay in business.
Yeah. And what's the kind of biggest thing that people are coming to you with now? Is it all COVID related? Is Brexit kind of in there? What's the kind of main thing?
At the moment, the licensed trade don't really care about COVID. Not about COVID, about Brexit, sorry.
Yeah.
It's very, Brexit it's not just taking a back seat, I think it's fallen off the bus.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough times, but I think I speak on behalf of the whole of the SWIB committee. We will be out supporting local pubs and businesses, and just pull me back from Ashton Lane. That's all I can say.
I'll meet you there.
Excellent. I look forward to that. Thanks very much, Jo. So now we're going to move on to our next speaker, who's also a SWIB member and has been around like me for a while too, Catherine Greig, who is an employment lawyer and runs her own business. So Catherine's up next.
Thanks, Debbie. Yes, so I'm Catherine Greig, for anyone who doesn't know me, and I specialise in employment law. I don't specialise in immigration, so I've just got a very light touch working knowledge of immigration. Also, Liz and Jo mentioning GDPR. I'm very pleased to say I am not an expert in GDPR either. But yes, employment law definitely gives us enough to concentrate on. And it is odd to think, who'd have thought that we would actually be looking forward to a seminar on Brexit, just as a change of topic from everything else, the one topic we've been discussing for a year. So when I was speaking to Debbie and the committee about this topic, and I was thinking, well, how would you describe what the impact of Brexit on employment law would be? And I'll just, the image that straight away popped into my mind was this. I don't know if everyone saw this a couple of weeks ago, but of course the transition period finished on the 31st of December, Hogmanay, just there. And we continued, most of EU law continued in force during the transition period. And so we formally left on Hogmanay there. 20 days later, I have circled the date up there, we get an announcement to say that the Business Secretary or the government are indeed carrying out a review of EU labour law. And the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, said he promised there would be no dilution of workers' rights. And if I just scroll down on this, He went on to say he confirmed that there was a review, but there would be no bonfire of rights. And it did make me think a little bit like the thick of it or Yes Minister. Be careful if you're a government minister and you come up with a great little phrase like that, bonfire of rights, because nobody will remember that he was confirming that there would be no bonfire. People just immediately think, oh, right, that's what's coming. So that was the 20th of January. And then very quick turnaround, the 28th, so 8 days later, very embarrassing U-turn. The post-Brexit review of workers' rights will not go ahead, says Business Secretary. So really, that is, when I think about employment law and Brexit, I think that's what we've got ahead of us. Obviously, government wanting to keep looking at this, keep looking at industry advantage, release businesses from red tape, all that kind of thing. But how do they do it in a politically acceptable way? And employment law has always been really political. It's one of the things I really enjoy about it. It moves constantly as social norms move. So even though it's contained in statutes and it's written, every time it goes to a tribunal or to a court, it's constantly moving because what people expect in the workplace is constantly changing. And also it's always been a bit of a political football, and depending on who is in government at the time, you can get big swings towards really heavy, large amounts of workers' rights, and then you get a swing with a change of political force and suddenly workers' rights are diluted. So this has always happened. And when I was thinking about this, I was remembering when I first started specialising in employment law, if you were a part-time worker, you needed to work for 5 years before you had even basic employment, unfair dismissal rights, which seems just crazy now. And then I think about 10, 15 years ago, you only needed 1 year in order to earn unfair dismissal rights. And then there was a change in government. I think, I can't remember, it was when the 97 change, but anyway, it went back up to 2 years. So it was this constant battle of, well, what's good for business? We don't want businesses tied up with expensive employment laws. On the other hand, trying to balance with being a civilized country with proper worker protections. And of course, against all of this background, a large part of UK employment law has always been derived from and grounded in EU law. Not all of it. Unfair dismissal, redundancy, all that kind of thing is completely a domestic creation. It's always just been a UK, or always started as a UK thing. But everything that's sort of enhanced workers' rights has had its basis in the EU law for a long time. So particularly discrimination law and the Equal Treatment Directive. Family-friendly leave, working time. Again, it's funny to think of, before the Working Time Directive from Europe, there was no statutory entitlement to paid holidays at all. It was definitely the norm among most employment that you would get some paid holiday, but there was no right to it. And if you were a worker, not an employee, but just a casual worker, then you had very limited rights at all. Transfer of undertakings comes from the UK, the EU, a lot of health and safety, a lot of whistleblowing. So very much the sort of the public policy and things that are seen as being good in a society, like removing discrimination, protecting whistleblowers, all of that has really been pushed from the EU point of view. And it comes from two main sources. You've got the EU directives, which are kind of like the Acts of Parliament, and then it also comes from the European Court of Justice, which is their court. So somebody in the UK, for example, there was a very good example with a pensions case. There was a UK Act when civil partnerships first were introduced in 2005. Before that, there was no same-sex civil partnership or marriage or anything like that. The UK introduced a law which affected pensions that said if you have a same-sex spouse or partner, yes, they can get your surviving spouse pension if you die, but we will only, pension schemes were allowed to fund pensions based on only acknowledging marriage from 2005. So if you had been in a same-sex relationship before 2005, tough. None of that would be acknowledged when calculating your surviving spouse's entitlement to a pension. So it was a case called Walker, and Mr. Walker went to the Supreme Court, our highest court, and said, even though there's an Act of Parliament that says really clearly, none of my service in relation to pre-2005 will be taken into account because I am deemed not to have had a spouse/civil partner before then, because the law didn't recognise such a thing. Our Supreme Court was allowed to overrule our own Act because it said we've got to comply with the Equal Treatment Directive in Europe, and we've got to say no one must be treated less favourably because of, in this case, their sexual orientation. So what's going to change? Well, as of the 31st of December at 11 p.m. last year, we're no longer part of the EU and we're out of the transition period, it's ended. But the UK, in order to enter into our Trade Cooperation Act, which was the deal that happened on Christmas Eve, in return for getting this tariff and quota-free trade deal with the EU, we agreed that there would be no reduction in employment rights. So that starting point is, oh, that sounds good. And the other thing that's happened is that as at the 31st of December last year, there's been a snapshot of all of the EU law which was in existence. So that's the directives and it's the case law from the European Court. So they basically just took a snapshot of that. They have rolled it up into something that's called retained EU law, and they've now placed that on our domestic statute book. So everything that came from the EU previously, now, as at today's date, still exists. We've called it now UK law. And according to the trade cooperation deal, the Christmas Eve deal, the UK government is not, if they want this tariff-free trading with Europe, we are not allowed to dilute these rights. So that sounds like nothing will change, but no, it's not actually quite as good as that. The UK government's not allowed to change these rights, but only to the extent that it would give the UK a trade or investment advantage. So in other words, they're not allowed to get rid of, let's say, all of the agency workers' rights. If we were to slash all of that and be able to engage really cheap agency workers, that would put the UK, that would give the UK a trade advantage over the other countries in the EU, and that wouldn't be permitted, or at least not under this non-binding trade and cooperation agreement. But that's not to say that we can't, that the UK government can't still make different changes. Why do we need 28 days paid holiday as a minimum? If that was to be reduced to 20 days paid holiday, for example, is that this kind of reduction that would affect trade or investment? Probably not. So I imagine that going forward, we are going to see a constant cycle of attempts to reduce employment rights by governments, because that will, in theory, make business more competitive, with a responding pushback from unions and from other pressure groups. And I think we'll just be enrolled in a constant cycle of that. Every time there will be an attempt to reduce it, there will then be an argument as to whether or not it breaches this trade agreement. So I imagine there'll be lots of different arguments and debates going forward. Right now, from a practical point of view, we can all assume that nothing has changed. The status quo completely exists as it always has done, and we will we'll get a lot of notice if there are any changes coming in. There are a few little safeguards. Part of the trade and cooperation agreement also says that there's not to be a massive reduction in rights, but also there's not to be a reduction in the way that people can enforce their rights. So we've got to maintain a proper enforcement mechanisms. So again, when people were thinking, well, what's likely to go? What are they going to try and pick off? There was a possibility that they might try and reintroduce employment tribunal fees again. And that was great for employers. The number of claims when employment tribunal fees came in absolutely plummeted. It was 70 to 80% reduction almost overnight. However, the government again had to backtrack on that, and they had to abandon tribunal fees because the statistics showed it was a proper barrier to justice. People simply couldn't afford to litigate genuine disputes because of the tribunal fees. So again, the government, in theory, are not allowed to impose any restrictions which would prevent people accessing their rights. It might also mean that for a long time, there's been talk of reducing or putting a cap on discrimination compensation. Unfair dismissal compensation has a cap, so you'll know you'll only ever get so far and not beyond. There's no cap on discrimination compensation. And again, potentially, the government, while this trade agreement is in place, won't be able to put a cap on discrimination compensation. So in summary, no change at the moment to employment law. Very pleased we've got an independent judiciary and that we're not in a position like the US, because the judiciary can still go back and look at the old European Court of Justice law to check that our laws are still being applied in the proper way. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention just now is one thing that I remember really being struck by when the Brexit debate was happening was people confusing the EU and human rights. And every now and again you would hear someone speaking about, well, I want to leave the EU because these human rights have just gone far too far. And Theresa May in particular at the time was wanting to abolish the Human Rights Act, which is the UK Act, and bring in something different. And again, it's just a reminder to say that the European Convention on Human Rights is entirely separate from the EU. It is, of course, the body and the rights that were brought in 1950, so brought in after the Second World War, while the EU has adopted some of the human rights and put it into the EU rules. We've still got a completely standalone Convention on Human Rights and, of course, a completely standalone European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, so completely separate from the EU. And that will continue to impact on employment law. Things like freedom of speech, if you're sacked for putting a post up on Facebook or sacked for having political affiliations, perhaps. We've got freedom to associate, which touches on unions, right to a family life, which touches on right to marriage and marriage discrimination, that kind of thing. Yeah, so we've still got access to all of that as normal. So I think that's all I wanted to say at the moment. But yes, very interested to hear any questions that you might have at the end of the speakers.
Thanks, Catherine. All I can say is I'm so pleased that there are specialist employment law lawyers out there, because I think there's so much to that, isn't there? I mean, even just from listening to you, it's like in that short period of time. It must be so, you must have such an interesting job looking at all these different pieces, and there must be some things that come up that kind of probably blow your mind, and you wonder how people, you know, can do that kind of stuff. But then if you bring something like Brexit into, or indeed COVID, that adds a whole different perspective and stuff that we've not faced before, I guess it just becomes more and more, it's all the detail, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny because on the one end, on one side you've got, I've never read a European directive. I've read the introduction to them, but you know, trying to read something like a European directive, it's a real skill. And then on the other end, you've got someone's real life and their real life all-consuming issue. Mm-hmm. So it's strange. You see both ends, the very high-level law, but then on an everyday basis, the problems it causes for people, but also the solutions that and the securities that it can give to people.
Yeah, and I guess it's something that you don't think about until you need it, or you don't think about that until you need help with it. It's a little bit like, you know, a pandemic just happened and it's not something you ever thought was going to happen to you, or you didn't, you know, so you're kind of not prepared if you're going through that, and then you need someone like yourself who knows about all these things and directives and stuff, which none of us have probably really come across before. So yeah, what an interesting field. Great, well, thank you very much, Catherine. We'll come on to, we've got some questions here, but we'll come on to those at the end of the speakers, if that's okay. Thanks very much. So our next speaker, our final speaker, last but not least, obviously, is Suzanne Sosna from SDI. Suzanne, we'll hand over to you now.
Hello, thanks very much. I hope I'm last but not least. I'm very happy to be here. I've never been to one of these, so it's really great to get the opportunity to take part tonight and to meet you. So I'm Suzanne Sosna. I'm at the moment Interim Director of Trade at Scottish Development International. Scottish Development International, or SDI for short, as you may know, is part of Scottish Enterprise. We work, we're responsible for, well, Scottish Enterprise for Economic Development in Scotland, SDI in particular for trade and inward investment into Scotland. So trade is very important to us. So Brexit has been you know, a very important aspect for us for a number of years now, actually. We work very closely with government, Scottish Government, very closely with civil servants in Scottish Government and ministers. But also with UK government, and Brexit is the UK government, and that's been one of the complexities in this as well. As much as we're close to government in Scotland, that's not the same thing as the management of the Brexit process has obviously been very much at UK level, as you'll know. So Liz would talk about the perfect storm, and I love what she said and others have said very much resonates with my own experience of this. But if I can just for a minute go back before Christmas, I mean, we've been preparing for Brexit for about 4 years or something like that, not me personally, but as an organisation we had been. But as you'll appreciate, as all having lived through that, there was so little certainty and so much delay in the process that you were preparing and not preparing simultaneously, because it was all, there were so many things we didn't know. So it was very tricky to prepare. The larger companies and many larger businesses would have been in a similar position to us, but were able to put resources like we were into preparing. So depending what industry they're in and the kind of business model they follow, a lot of them are, I would have said, or were able to be more prepared, even despite all the uncertainties. But it really culminated just before Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I couldn't believe that at 4 o'clock was when we knew on Christmas Eve that what the arrangements were going to be with regards to tariffs. Albeit it was good news, it was so late with regards to the typical Christmas closures you would have. So Scottish Enterprise, we kept his staff open, as many chambers and many other organisations that would normally close during that period, we didn't. So ourselves and many partners kept a skeleton staff in. Joe, I'm terrified to talk about our website, although I will talk about it notwithstanding, but we also have a helpline for Brexit, 0300 303 0661, which we ran through that period as well. And we really just didn't know what it would be like that during Christmas and then into January, and now we've all lived through that. Liz is right that there was some stockpiling. I would say also what we've seen as we've come into January, that because of the COVID, the impact of COVID, and for many businesses, we were talking about the licensed trade there, but for many businesses they've been impacted by both COVID and Brexit, so they've got the double whammy that they're experiencing, and the problems of Brexit have exacerbated the issues already had because of COVID. So, but one of the factors that's happened in January is the food sector, for example, which, as we all know, has been really badly impacted. The food sector, particularly perishable foods, is already only trading at about 25% of its normal rates in terms of its trade with the EU. So the volumes are much, much lower than they would normally be. But one of the times that's very important for that sector, as many of you will appreciate, is of course the New Year, Christmas New Year period, particularly for the seafood sector. And that is partly why we've heard so much about that sector, and also for other reasons. It's one of the sectors that's been most impacted by export health certificates, for example, and particular regulations around the movement of food products and meat and seafood products. Our trade with the EU is very important to Scotland. We sell approximately £16 billion worth of product to the EU every year. And by point of comparison to the US, we sell about 6 billion. So it is really, really important market for us. Our role in SCI is to grow our export sales, and that's Chambers are an important part of that as well, as our other partners in helping companies develop their international trade. So our worry is that this sets companies back. What we've experienced, and some of it's been touched on, but what we've experienced in January and February is seen, I'd maybe group it into 5 areas so far on the impact on businesses. The non-tariff barriers, I think, are quite well known. Liz talked about this, the extensive new customs and export requirements and processes. There's been a lot of confusion about them. We don't have enough people who know about them. Some companies, as said before, who export outside the EU, they would have had a head start. But many of the smaller companies simply don't have the people or resources, and they don't know who does, in order to really carry out the administrative processes. These administrative processes also have costs both ways. And if products are in a production line and are perhaps being moved, and this happens also with food products, even cheese products and other products, they'll go into the EU, back to the UK for different parts of the process, for example. And this happens also in engineering, manufacturing, as you'll know, many other processes where products are moving back and forward, and duties can apply each way. So, or not duties, sorry, paperwork has to be completed each time, and that all adds cost. So these non-tariff barriers, and as I mentioned before, particularly for some sectors, export health certificates, other sanitary and phytosanitary regulations as well, particularly, so not just for live food or food products, but also affects plants, seeds and other organic products. So we've seen a lot of those come into play, and we've heard a lot, particularly from the food sector, going through the month of January and into February. The other second aspect that's come in quite affected and may affect some people here tonight is the VAT issues. We have seen a disproportionate impact, and I don't think we know about it yet. We don't have all the data. Because we're living this live in the public sector, we don't necessarily have access to the data. So we're building our pictures often from anecdotal information, but we believe that a lot of small and micro SME businesses are disproportionately affected. Business to consumer, I think Liz mentioned somebody mentioned the selling over the internet. That's been really impacted. So the retail sector, consumer sectors, badly impacted. and I suppose processes, routes to market that we took for granted, such as being able to sell to consumers. I would highlight Northern Ireland as well in that, and the number of companies who now, I think John Lewis was mentioned, are not shipping directly to consumers in Northern Ireland. I was speaking to Northern Irish colleagues today in government in Northern Ireland, and they were saying that consumer choice in Northern Ireland has absolutely plummeted. They simply can't buy online what they are used to buying online. So they really are having a very difficult time in Northern Ireland with that. The rules of origin, that's been mentioned as well. We're at the tip of the iceberg around rules of origin. Some companies have been very badly affected. I talked about production processes, so that they're impacted with regards to paperwork, but they can also be impacted if, as Liz said, if no value is added at a particular stage, they can also be impacted there. We've got some companies that we know of and work with who their business is a trading business, so they might be importing from Asia, for example, packaging or doing some fairly low value add process in the UK, and this can be in any sector, including medical sector, and then repackaging to sell to the EU. They've been really badly hit. So the rules of origin, I think we're only at the start of that, and that's going to be quite impactful. Impacts in retail as well, and I think it will probably impact to some degree in the restaurant industry, and for obvious reasons we're perhaps not hearing so much about that right now. We're aware of certain restrictions, although there are no tariffs. Some products like seed potatoes are affected, and so Scottish Government's been doing quite a bit to try and work with the UK Government on some of those issues. And then the fifth issue would be around disruption to and increased costs and problems with capacity, and I'm sure it all have come across it in the media or from your own experience in the haulage sector. The haulage sector is really impacted, and they're impacted by a lot of the same issues. They don't necessarily have all the information they need. There have been issues in other European countries with different countries interpreting regulations differently, so giving conflicting advice and information, and that's impacted a lot as well on our flow of products, not really exporting or importing, but our flow of products into Northern Ireland. So there's been a lot of issues, and we're at the start of this. I think the service sector as well is going to be impacted, and we're only at the beginning of that. I've talked probably a long time. I would like to say that there is hope, and I said about the website approach. We have had for about 4 years a kind of partnership across Scotland behind an approach called Prepare for Brexit. I realise Prepare for Brexit is a bit past its sell-by date as a name, but we have kept it for now because people are still looking that up on the internet and still going there. We will be phasing it into other websites, more business as usual websites, but at the moment we've kept it so that people could still find it easily. As I say, as well as our helpline, we do have that. The benefit of a website is that you can put all the most active and relevant links and information there, and if we keep it as one resource, it's, we can do it in real time. So every morning we get data in from the UK Government, and we can make sure it's relevant on our own website. So that's the reason we use a website approach. It is the most efficient way, but we have a helpline as well and advisors who sit behind that at different levels of specialism who can also help businesses. And sometimes that can be about finding the right information online because it can be bewildering. The other thing I'd stress, and the Chambers does this too, as do others, the importance or the usefulness of webinars, particularly because you can watch them again in playback. And there are so many organisations offering these, from the Institute of Export, various departments, DEFRA from UK Government, and many different departments, HMRC, there are so many different ones, and we do log them on the website. And because they can be watched in playback, you can skip through if it's not interesting to you or whatever, then that can be an efficient way also of gathering information. and we have a frequently asked question, we have an A to Z. We're doing what we can to try and get the information to the right people. But I really welcome the kind of ethos that was set, I think, by Liz and others in the first conversation about we're all in this together, and I think that is really important. That and Scotland is, has the advantage of being a small country and people know each other, and we are very much trying to collaborate across different public and private sector agencies to work together to help each other through this. And we will get to the end. Exporting is still, people might have to look at different business models, might have to change pricing, might have to do things in a different way from before, but it still can be, and for many businesses, a very profitable and valuable part of their business, and we want to keep on helping with that in all ways we can.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
That's finished.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Do you think that these issues and things will continue into next year, to 2022, or do you see things kind of being, not obviously put to bed, but kind of tied up a bit quicker than that? Do you see it something that will continue for a while?
So I'd have to say yes and no. So I think some of it we are already seeing things sorting out. That credit to so many companies who have had an incredibly steep learning curve, and it's through one of the important roles that we have is synthesising these issues and passing them through to UK government. We take part in meetings, for example, with senior people in government. We invited companies onto a call recently with Michael Gove, they all had their very specific points to make. So that kind of lobbying and push to get things resolved. Solutions have to be found, solutions will be found. We just have to persevere. It's frustrating and it's difficult, but we will find solutions to most of it. But there will be things that go on, I think, for some sectors. Particularly as we said, we don't know where we're going to be in the service sector, so some of that does have to play through.
Okay, and I've got a comment here from Caroline, who's one of our attendees tonight, and I'm going to ask this to everyone on the panel, but as you're here, I think I'll just mention it first to you. And she said she thinks, she's saying it's fair to say that the government could have done better so that businesses knew what to do. So would you agree with that? What would your thoughts be?
I couldn't honestly disagree with that, of course, and systems should have been tested. And yes, this is in my life. I imagine most of us, we've never seen and experienced anything like this so last minute. And Christmas Eve to be in that position when it was very difficult. So I think we tried. We obviously also would, from our point of view, you can always look in retrospect, you could have done things differently or better. And we tried to prepare everything that we could, but inevitably, the process meant we had very, very little time. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I suspect that's going to be the thoughts of most people. And I'm going to open up to the rest of the panel now. Jo, what would your thoughts be on that comment?
I think we were very, very last minute. And for businesses to try and prepare when they don't know what they're preparing for is very difficult. And then to have a week to try and get things organised, and also the terminology that people use makes it more complicated. I think that we should really try and to let people know what they need to do in plain English, so that they can understand what their obligations are. And I know everybody tries, but and I know myself, when I'm writing something, if you know what it is, you just write it the way you know it is, but you don't expect that other people might not understand what you're talking about. So as I used to tell people, people used to say to me is, keep it simple, stupid.
Okay, Liz, any comments on that?
I agree with my two other speakers, but I think it's also worth, just remembering that if you look back, the UK government's only priority was to get a deal signed. but nothing else was on their mind. And, you know, David Frost, you know, negotiated as best he could. It's a bit like any policy decision or announcement that's made by any government right now. That's Westminster Holyrood makes wonderful announcements in the last 12 months. We don't stop and think about the implementation of them. And I think that the sheer size of Brexit, and I mean, I think that, you know, Catherine mentioned just that's one very, very small part in terms of employment law. You know, this is breaking up a relationship that's gone on for many, many years. And in fact, a lot of the rules and regulations, the UK led those and actually formed them. So I think that the problem has been that the priority was not about, you know, how could business then automatically transfer. And I think that COVID had a lot of issues as well. But I think it was Joe that mentioned that Brexit was the back end of the bus, and it was, until all of a sudden we're at that cliff edge.
Thank you. And Catherine.
I just liked Suzanne's comment there. We're living this live. And I think that just sums it up. I think people in business, we like certainty. And to a certain extent, it doesn't matter whether that's good certainty or bad certainty. We just like certainty in planning. So I think that really has been incredibly difficult, not being able to plan. And that's the double whammy, Brexit and COVID.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate. It all keeps kind of happening at once, didn't it? So Catherine, there's a question here for you that I've lost you. Where is it? And it's kind of around about what your thoughts are about people being told they have to have the COVID vaccine. Yeah. What are your thoughts around that?
Again, as an employment lawyer, one of my favourite phrases is it's very fact specific. It depends on the circumstances. Again, something that employers are just going to have to do is decisions on a case-by-case basis. There's definitely not going to be one rule for every business. The other thing, I mean, classic example, care home, for example, you can absolutely see that if there were, again, starting point is the gut reaction would be, of course, you would have to be vaccinated so that you are not putting vulnerable people at risk. But then there are issues with discrimination. If you look at the demographic of who works in care homes, if people who are pregnant are not recommended to take the vaccine, I think now they've changed advice and said trying to get pregnant, it's okay. But breastfeeding, I think, is still, what if you are somebody who wants to breastfeed for a year? You know, are you then dismissed? So again, an employer, I think, is just going to have to review their decision and then review it and review it again. And it's going to come down to the scientific evidence. If all of your care home residents are vaccinated and have got both vaccinations, does that lower the risk? Does that mean that somebody keeping their job then goes higher up the priority compared to? So there you go, balance. If you're in an insurance company and you can work from home, but your boss decides, I'd rather have everybody where I can see them again, that would, I think, be a situation where it definitely would be unfair to dismiss someone for not having a vaccine. So it depends. It depends, and it's going to keep changing depending on as the scientific advice changes as well.
I'm getting the sense that there's no real straight answer for a lot of these employment questions, are there? It's kind of a case by case. Yeah.
And again, you've got to be able to show that you've applied your mind to it if you want to have a chance of saying that this is a fair decision. And if it's challenged, then you need to be in a position to be comfortable about sitting in front of someone and saying, here are all my thought processes. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It's not a blanket decision that covers everyone. It's a nuanced one for this particular set of circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Liz, I've got a question here for you. What difference or benefits might a free port in Scotland bring us?
I'm a firm supporter of free ports. Let me just put my cards on the table. We lobby the Scottish Government because we want not just one in Scotland, we want more than that. And I'm very, very pleased the government actually listened to us on this occasion, and they announced a couple of weeks ago the development of green ports is what the label is in Scotland for those in the meeting just now that maybe don't quite understand what it is, what free port is. And effectively a free port is creating a space through which businesses can actually invest, a space where they get incentives, they get reductions in perhaps the cost of doing business, they potentially get reductions in their tariff costs. They also get reductions in if they're going to invest, and in terms of that added value, they could bring a product in, as far as importing is concerned, do something in a free port and then get it right back out again, and they will not be subject to the double costs of exporting and importing. So it actually fits beautifully right now. And you know, the big issue for me is that you know, it's the reduction in costs, investment, bringing investors into Scotland, and also bringing new businesses in. So I think it's got massive benefits, providing we get it right, providing that we design a green port model that is designed by business working with the government on this, not just you know, because there's other examples that have not worked in Scotland before, and in my humble opinion, it's because we didn't actually get the model right. It's not that the concept of it is not working. We just need to look at Singapore and other parts of the world where they're working very, very well. So, and the big danger, and that was a big concern that we had in Scottish business, and that is, the big danger is that our main competitors for free ports are other parts of the United Kingdom, and they're already ahead of the game with bids being put in by consortia of businesses, either at ports and or airports, and or perhaps, you know, we've got innovation hubs that are setting up all over Scotland. I don't care what they're called, I don't care what the label is, but we need that environment that's going to reduce those costs to help us grow and expand Scotland. Okay,
thanks. I've got a question that's just come in here from Fiona Waddle, which is to everyone, and it's quite a long question. So Fiona, I'm going to get you to ask it just to make sure you get it over properly. So if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself. There we go.
Okay, this really is for Suzanne. We are a life sciences company. We sell services rather than products in the EU. And we have employees and consultants who live in the EU and who do the work there. So if somebody's wanting an audit, for example, in Slovakia, then we have a Slovakian office. And we have heard that these things are going to be a lot more difficult. The people that work with us tell us it's going to be difficult, but we haven't actually seen any evidence of law that makes it more difficult. And I don't know whether it's difficult because people think it's going to be difficult, or it really is going to be difficult. Do you have anything at all, any information that would allow us to see through this murk?
Suzanne.
Yeah, so those, if your staff are not, I'm assuming from what you're saying that they're not coming from Scotland, traveling to these markets, that they're living in these markets.
Some of them are.
They have,
some of them are.
So if they have the right to live in that market, which is the first question, so they have the right to work there.
Yep.
So if we assume that they have that, then I can't understand why you would have particular issues, because those consultants and specialists are living in that. Did you say Slovakia? Sorry.
Slovakia, Lithuania, Russia. Yeah.
I can't see why. Now, we don't know everything around services, but the whole question about that is about exporting in inverted commas. So in your case, people then traveling to Slovakia to deliver services. Yep. And there's also issues about recognizing their qualifications, and all of that needs to be sorted out. But if somebody has the right to live and work in Slovakia, the fact that it's a foreign-owned company, i.e. if you're a Scottish business, a UK-owned business, that should have no impact on this.
It does have them.
Okay, so that didn't know then.
I think it's just because we don't have enough information. These things have happened too quickly without really letting us know what's happening. So the people who employ us, which are generally pharmaceutical companies, they are now saying, oh, we're not allowed to use people in the EU, or we're not allowed for you to travel to the EU. So they're putting up the barriers, but I think it's ignorance why they're putting up the barriers. And it would be good to know what the real law is about this. Now, that's good about the right to work. Is there anything else that would let them move? So the people from Scotland or England as well, we have, who go abroad to work, and they just go abroad for maybe a week or something and then come back again. But we also have people out there who stay out there. And we are definitely being told that there are problems by the people who normally employ us.
Okay, so I think there's a number of issues there. If the people, you can still send someone from the UK to deliver services within the EU. As you know, you can stay in any EU country up to 90 days. We don't have all the details about what else might be required for people who want to work longer than that. That's still to be worked through. I think Catherine might know more than me about that. I'd be happy to pick up with you separately, because I feel like there's probably a lot of questions I would have. The pharmaceutical companies generally are quite professional businesses who have good information, so I'm a bit surprised. So yeah, perhaps I could pick that up with you.
Yeah. That would be good.
We can get your details across if
that would be
great. Thank you.
Maybe something I'm not understanding there.
I saw Liz looking like she was going to say something there at one point. Did you want to come in on that, Liz?
Yeah, it's okay. It's the free movement of trade and free movement of people that we're talking about. But if Susanna's picking it up for you, Fiona, then I don't need to intervene.
Thank you.
Because it is fixable and doable, is all I would say. And I think that there's and you said it yourself. I think there's just a misunderstanding of interpreting what we can do and what we can't do in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. There's another question here from Elena, which looks like it's quite a specific question. So, Elena, would you mind just asking the question?
Hi, yeah, so the first company I have is an education product, and I'm assuming that rules for that haven't changed, but I'm considering starting a new business with a product which we're importing from the United States in the kind of health industries. I just didn't really know where to start with that in terms of, you know, how much extra it's going to cost for people who on the EU side who then buy it. Obviously, they're paying the liability of that. Is that not correct? In terms of a disincentive for them, is that the case?
Who wants to take that one?
Elena, I'm not quite sure if you're saying you're bringing the product in from somewhere in the USA and then redirecting it through Europe and then into the UK. Is that what you're saying?
No, it would be from America to here for sale here and say repackaging and for EU.
You're importing it, and I'm assuming that, or maybe you haven't done, have you costed that out at this point in time or not?
I'm just starting to do that, yeah.
Okay. Might I suggest, on this call, might I suggest if somebody gives me my details to you, I'll take that on and connect you up with someone that can take you through that so that you can properly cost it and then look at whether it's going to be profitable or otherwise and taking it in, if that's okay with you, Elena.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Liz.
Excellent, thanks. And I think one final question probably to end on to each of the panel is, what do you think the biggest benefit or positive of Brexit has been that you've maybe encountered? So I'd quite like to leave us on a positive note if possible. So Catherine, would you like to kick us off?
Again, my specialism isn't in trade or anything along those lines. I think I'm sad that we're leaving the EU and all of that. I mean, the brains of the people in the European Court of Justice, the lawyers there, are just incredible. I'm sad that we're losing all of that jurisprudence going forward in the future. But what I'm really pleased about is that we have an independent judiciary. Again, mentioned it before, thinking back about the USA and how connected their high courts are to the government. I think that's pretty scary. So yes, just very pleased that going forward we've got an independent court and judiciary that can keep an independent view on these things.
Great stuff. And Suzanne?
That's an easy question to end on. I think it's quite early to see many positives. I think one of them has been that quite a number of businesses that we're dealing with who've been trading only with the EU are starting to look at other markets such as Asia. These are a lot of them really growing markets, and are achieving growth that we couldn't dream about really here. And we have great connections out there, not just through SDI, but universities, etc. So I was speaking to somebody this morning, for example, from Singapore, and there's just so much opportunity out in Asia. So I suppose if I were to try and find a positive, it would be the increased interest from businesses that we're working with, because there's a more level playing field. We were hearing a lot from Joe about the States, and I hope the situation improves for the whisky industry for there. But if you'd be doing documentation, whether you're selling now to the EU or whether you're selling to Singapore or America, so it's a more level playing field now. So maybe that's a positive. Okay, thank you. And Joe, over to you.
Well, like Suzanne, I think it's made us look not just at Europe, because Europe was quite an easy trade previously, and I don't think we should stop trading with Europe at all. We will overcome these barriers, but we have started looking at other areas, parts of the world that we probably didn't before. We've got the trade agreement with Japan. And I think it maybe reset us, say, right, let's look elsewhere as well. So I think that's a good positive.
Great. And Liz, finally over to you.
Well, not to repeat, I think my previous speakers have said it about lifting our head and getting out there, and this is forcing us to do it. Now that COVID has forced us to change many business models, it also forced us to look at doing business in a different way and revisiting what it is we deliver. So the resilience we've got, quite frankly, and the ambition, it's there. So this will force us out, and I think that's a great thing, because our exporting performance has been diabolical in a lot of sectors. Whisky excluded there, Joe, because you're up there. You're up there in the lights. You're doing a fab job, even with your tariffs in the USA. So it's going to force us. And my plea is that even if you're a 1, 2, 3 person business here, do not believe that you cannot export. We went out to China a couple of years ago. In fact, with a group of businesses, and the maximum number they were employing, they went from 2 people up to about 18, 19 people. Do not think that you cannot do it because you're small. In actual fact, because you're a small business, we adapt, we're flexible, we change so quickly. So we've got a lot going for us in the small business market. So it's going to force us out there. And also, I think, let's not undersell ourselves. That the UK, Scotland, we're still a very attractive place for our assets, for our talent, for our expertise. So Europe is also, we're important to Europe. So it's two ways. So I think that for me, that my positive message there. And there was a chat on about Erasmus funding. Is that going to be problematic? Yes, Erasmus was great. I'm third supporter of that as well for our colleges, universities, and our young people in terms of talent. We've got the what's it called? The fund, the new fund, the UK Prosperity Fund. Let's make sure that we can tap into that and develop our own new Erasmus. So there's lots of positivity. We just need to, as I say, get by this survival mode in COVID and support one another as much as we possibly can.
Great, that's not a bad message to end on, I don't think. And one part about unfortunately not being together is that we can't thank you all in the kind of normal way that we would do. And that's actually something I've missed, Julie, is being able to do that. But thanks very much to each and every one of you on the panel. That's been great. And I think we could have kept this talking for hours. So maybe we'll do another one in maybe 6 months' time, and we'll bring wine or some whiskey or something like that into it. if that's okay. That can maybe make it slightly different, and we'll obviously keep our local businesses going by delivering stuff as well. But thanks very much to everyone. Thank you to everyone that joined us also. If there is anyone who wants to swap details, then just get in touch with us over social media or email us if that's okay with the panel to go back and forward with some email addresses and things if that comes up. So please get in touch if that's something you want to do. But enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening. And there's lots to think about. Anything at all, just please get in touch with us. But thanks again to everyone for joining.
Thanks,
Thanks, Debbie.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.